So to kick off our camera projection course, let's ask the question, what are camera projections? And simply put, camera projections are a way of getting parallax from a 2D painting or a 2D image. And you may or may not be familiar with that word parallax. Well, parallax is the relative visible movement between objects. At least that's the definition for our purposes. So if you are in a forest, like the pictures that we have here, you may be driving by in your car, and you may have three trees that are separate from each other in the distance. And then when you drive by them, these three trees will converge together. So the movement between these objects is called parallax. And an easy thing that you can do right now where you're sitting is just take a look around you and move your head back and forth and focus on an object in front of you and see how things move behind it. And so the principle of parallax is the objects that are farthest away have the least amount of parallax, and the objects that are closest to you have the most parallax. So you might be asking yourself, why is parallax so important to matte painting? And that's because it makes 2D matte paintings come alive. So it all comes down to the demand for dynamic camera moves. Because back in the 70s and the 80s, a lot of those films didn't have very demanding camera moves. They were either static, where they would stay still, or they would have slight moves. And in both of those cases, you could get away with a 2D painting and you would just be completely fine. In modern films, it's a lot less common to see those types of camera moves that they used in the 80s and the 70s. Now they're wanting more and more dynamic camera moves where the camera is sweeping through an environment with a lot of parallax. And so camera projections is a technique of making your 2D paintings 3D. And so you can have big sweeping camera moves through your 2D paintings and it makes it come alive. And really, if projections weren't around, then matte painting as an art would have died a long time ago. So let's talk about the projection tools that are available to matte painters. And when I say tools, I mean 3D applications that can project 2D images onto 3D objects. So, and the first of these is Maya, and I'm listing these in not any particular order, but Maya definitely has the ability to project images. Nuke, 3D Studio Max, Softimage, Cinema 4D, and Houdini. So I would say the most popular of all of these applications would clearly be Nuke. In most cases, when you are seeing a projection set up, it's going to be a Nuke. And the reason is because Nuke has such an amazing package for projections, and that most of the time you can use Nuke. And if it's getting more and more complex and the geometry is much, much too heavy for Nuke to handle, because Nuke is actually a compositing package that has projection capabilities. So if it gets too heavy for the software, then you need to go into a full 3D application such as Maya and 3D Studio Max. I would say some of the least commonly used projection tools would be Softimage, because the software is not being developed currently, and Cinema 4D, although I do know that Sony has developed tools for Cinema 4D for their matte painters to use. And kind of a new emerging application would be Houdini to be used for projections. So let's move on to talk about some of the elements of camera projections. And these elements exist in any of those software packages that I've mentioned before. And actually, they have to be there in order for you to do a camera projection. So the first of these elements is the matte painting. And the matte painting is the 2D image that's being projected. And so that can either be a single 2D image or broken up into individual layers, or have multiple matte paintings from different cameras being projected. The next element is the shot camera. Every projection setup needs a shot camera. So this is the final image that's going to be rendered through the shot camera and then composited. These cameras will be a tracked camera based on the plate, and it will live within the 3D application. The projection camera is the camera that is projecting the matte painting. And this projection camera is often based off of the shot camera. Not all the time, but most of the time it's based off the shot camera. As where the shot camera has movement to it and shake and jitter on the camera, the projection camera is absolutely static. In order to make the matte paintings parallax, it needs to be projected onto 3D geometry. And this 3D geometry can actually be shapes, or it can be simple as 2D cards placed in 3D space. The last element is the projection shader. So the projection shader is what grabs the camera and grabs the matte painting and tells it to project onto the 3D geometry. So just as a review, you have a projection shader that takes the projection camera and the matte painting and projects it onto the 3D geometry. And that whole projection setup is rendered through the shot camera. So we've been talking a lot about projections, but how does projections work? And if you look at this image, it's a pretty nice visual of how projections work. If you think of projections as like an overhead projector, projecting an image onto a 3D object. And so we have this picture here of this guy pointing to this slide. He has this image being projected on him. So you look at these lines in the background, and obviously they're straight lines. But as they get projected on him, it curves around the 3D object. And because it's projecting on a 3D object, now that 2D image has form and it has shape.